and we're going to be talking about digital identity systems for trust and scale. This event is presented by the Center for Accelerating Financial Equity, CAFE, in partnership with National Alliance for Financial Literacy and Inclusion, NAFLI. And we're so excited to be here with you. I'm excited to be here with industry experts in this space and really leaders in their respective fields. In a minute, I'll have them introduce themselves, but we have Amanda Estevan-Colas, we have Martha Underwood, and we have Elizabeth Garber joining me. And today we're really going to be talking about the technical, regulatory, and operational challenges and innovations in the digital identity space for financial institutions, but really keeping people also in the center of this really important conversation. And this 45 minutes with you, we're going to be divided into different sections. So the first one will really be setting the stage and landscape, where I'll be asking panelists to kind of weigh in on different topics. The second is about policy and regulation. The third is really the human-focused element of this in verification systems. And then we'll talk about really what's next in the future, different innovations, and really the road ahead in this space. If you have any comments or questions for us, please put them in the LinkedIn Live chat. And first, I'd like to just quickly introduce myself. I'm Kristen Castell, the Managing Director of CAFE. And CAFE is really a nonprofit organization that has a mission to advance financial wellness for low to moderate income people. The way we do that is through fintech innovation and partnerships. And so we have a flagship fintech accelerator programs where we support financial technology companies that have solutions in market that are selling through financial institutions, but once they get in the hands of people, really help their lives. And so we connect them with banks, with credit unions, with investors, academia, regulators, and everyone else around, really around in the industry to help them scale. And now I'd like to turn it over to the panelists for a minute each to introduce themselves. Amanda?
Hi, thanks so much, Kristen. First and foremost, so excited to be here. My name is Amanda Estevan-Colas, 20 plus years experience in financial services, and half of that has been with the fintech. I'm also the founder of AG Advisors and board member for NAFLI, National Alliance for Financial Literacy and Inclusion, and really excited for this partnership with CAFE. This is a huge opportunity for us to continue to have progressive conversations on topics that are really important to us, such as digital identity. That's just a little bit about myself. NAFLI is, like I said, focused on these progressive conversations. We also work with financial institutions, fintech leaders, policymakers as well, and just being that voice of the average consumer and making sure that organizations that are building products and services are keeping inclusive design in mind.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Now I'll turn it to Martha.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here. Great to see everyone. I am Martha Underwood, CEO and founder of Prism, where we help banks keep deposits in-house by automating the transfer of assets from account holders to beneficiaries. Been in technology for a long time and excited to have this conversation.
Thanks so much, Martha. Elizabeth?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Garber. I do have a history in financial services and as an entrepreneur starting a fintech. Right now, though, I work primarily with nonprofit organizations that are building secure, rights-enhancing, and interoperable digital identity solutions. So I work with a standard-setting organization called the OpenID Foundation, which builds secure, privacy-preserving identity standards. I work with an organization called City Hub, which is working on safe, interoperable identity solutions around the world. And I work with a UN working group called DPI Safeguards, which is building safeguards for digital public infrastructure like identity in countries all around the globe.
Incredible. You guys are all incredible. And you can see why I'm so excited about this conversation and why we really felt the need, CAFE and NAFLI, to bring this out and really, bring the top leaders to talk about this. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask the first question to all the panelists. So I really love everyone to weigh in here. Why is digital identity so central to access in today's economy? And how have you seen identity verification impact inclusion or exclusion within your specific work? And I think Does anyone want to take that first? Otherwise, we can go around. I mean, imagine we're in a, I wish we were all in person today and we were like on a panel, but we're doing Hollywood Squares. So anyone would like to go first?
I can jump in. I can get us kicked off.
Okay.
It's central, because right now access is going to digital first. Like from opening a bank account, from telehealth, it all starts by proving that you are who you say you are. Like you can't transact unless you're able to pass that verification process. So that's central. And from an exclusion or inclusion perspective, it really plays out in the design, in the UX. And if you can't pass the checks, that can impact the economics of that person, right? Like I can't get to my bank account because I wasn't authenticated, or my my identity wasn't verified. So it's really critical, and I think that exclusion piece really lies in that UI or that design of how we're designing. And so I know we'll double click on that and go deeper into that from a design perspective and how we include people, but that's kind of what I am seeing from why it's central and what some of the issues are with inclusion and exclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. So identity itself, not just digital identity, but identity itself.
Yep.
And specifically legal recognition, the right to legal recognition before the law is a fundamental human right. That is Article 6 of the Human Rights Treaty that most governments have signed up to. And it's because that right to legal recognition, it stands between us and all of our other rights, whether it's healthcare, education, the right to start a family, the right to travel, et cetera. And as you said, Martha, as this world is becoming more globally distributed and more digitized, the access to a way of digitally presenting who you are or who your business is becomes all the more important, because we are going to leave people behind. We're going to leave businesses behind. We're going to leave countries and economies behind if we don't have access to those ways of identifying ourselves. And we saw this during the pandemic. I think there were, in the United States, I was working for a bank. I think you were working for a bank. And, there are two things that are popping to mind. Number one, when we rolled out the Paycheck Protection Program, some banks had differences in the way that they were verifying the businesses who were applying for that lending program, right? Some had more difficulty verifying identities than others. The infrastructure just wasn't there. At the same time, individuals who were applying for benefits through their state governments, different states had different vendors had different methods of supporting them. And many people were left out in the cold, unable to access benefits they were entitled to because of the identity verification processes that were in place. And when you look across the world, the U.S. had much bigger problems with this because we lacked the infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd like to dig in there too more later with you in terms of what you're seeing globally and bringing that into the U.S. Amanda, what do you think?
Yeah, I love the fact that we're having conversations with industry experts. And, at NAFLI, we're continuing having conversations, especially with local banks, community banks, like regional banks. And we're finding that they're still having, issues with digital identity verification. It's still rigid in their process. And we all understand that, to be seen and to be accounted for is already important. And there's a huge population of the unbanked and underserved that is being missed out into our financial ecosystem. So it's really important that whether, we're accessing payment wallets or we're applying for credit or we're onboarding to a fintech platform, it's important to be accounted for. It's important to be part of the financial ecosystem. And, that is where the inclusion lies. But as we're starting to see like new technologies, right? Banks are opening up to open banking, like the open banking environment is creating an access to leverage alternative data. This is time for us now to have these conversations and really making sure, like I said before, inclusive design, making sure that we're designing these products and services for a variety of consumers to be able to participate in our financial ecosystem. And so, I think it's a huge opportunity. And I love the fact that we're having these conversations because, like I said, a lot of our local banks are still, working through verification, access issues. And, I think that is a huge miss, a huge opportunity in profitability too. So it's just, being part of the conversation, making sure that we're considering the consumers or all.
Yeah, no, really well said. And we're seeing this as a huge topic for the financial institutions that we work with in Cafe, and then of course with the fintech companies that we support and really what they've been building. And that's why I'm so excited to have Prism here and what Martha's been building too, really in the space. So this question's for Martha. From financial institutions and into fintechs, how are different sectors approaching identity verification today, and where are the gaps?
Wow, so many gaps. So heavy question, right? Because everyone is attacking it differently. So you have the traditional banks that have like the KYC, the Know Your Customer, and all of these things, right? But and they're still using documents and having to go into the branch, which leads to siloed data, right? And different processes and having to be authenticated based on the product that you're trying to access. So very antiquated, very manual. Right. Then you have the fintechs that are kind of moving to like the pass keys and passwordless, but that still kind of have some issues because if I send you a link to be able to authenticate in, what if I can't get into my email address, right? There's still a barrier there. And we also see some emerging models that's coming up like the user control wallets, or selective disclosures. So you see how these different groups are really attacking it differently. So there's gaps between it because there's no standardization. And that's what the gap is. Like, what is the framework? Like, how can we work towards a framework that we can all adhere to make it easier for our consumers to be able to access whatever products or services they're trying to get access to? Because if I go to the bank, it's one thing. If I go to my app, it's another thing, right? And then now I'm moving to digital wallets. And also, how is that inclusive? Because you got the digital natives and the younger generation that can use the digital wallets. But what about our older population that might not be as digitally savvy? How are we going to authenticate them or educate them for them to be able to leverage some of the newer technologies that's coming in? So having conversations like this, talking to industry leaders, talking to our legislators, to be a part of the conversation, to say, this is how we're thinking about it. This is how we should be thinking about it. This is how we should standardize it. And having all of the voices at the table. That's the fintechs, the banks, the users, everyone, so that we're building something that's standard and inclusive across the board.
Yeah, really well said. And so there's the design, there's the existing systems, there's the gaps, there's what these organizations, fintechs and financial institutions are doing. Now let's talk regulation. So I'd love you all to weigh in on this question and really about the current regulatory framework, whether it's helping, hindering, what should we be developing more really in this space for digital identity, and what changes would you like to see?
Yeah, I do see on the positive side, right? We've noticed like changes like the CFPB 1033 is a good sign of progress, right? It's allowing for consumer control on their own data, which I think opens up portability, right? Access to data, access to alternative data methods in terms of verifying identity. But, of course, there's still improvements, like we mentioned, right? We have such a rigid system with our AML process, our Know Your KYC process. And a lot of it is because it's built off legacy systems based off, conversations that we've been having with some of the banks. The things, you asked me what would I like to see. Of course, we're in a digital economy where we have multiple platforms to use to bank, right? We have our banking institutions, we have our credit unions, we have our fintechs, P2P systems and things like that. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd love for us to have interoperability between those systems, figuring out a way where we, if there was a way to design where you don't necessarily have to continuously verify yourself. I mean, that's a wish list. And I'm sure, Martha and Elizabeth have a different take on it. But, literally, with the fact that we've had some of these progresses around consumer data, is there other ways that we could leverage some of this alternative data, like payroll data for the gig economy that may not necessarily have your standardized legacy documentation? And so, I do think that the regulatory framework, while we have rules to keep us all in line, they're just, the fact that there are so many creative solutions that are being built, especially with the fintechs, are organizations leveraging these fintech partnerships to open up and serve some of these unbanked consumers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what, we work with, both the fintechs and the banks all day on that. And would anyone else like to weigh in kind of on the regulatory framework? So what changes do we need, I guess, to do what Amanda was saying in terms of bringing that together?
So I've got 3 points I'd like to make, and I'm going to start super broad and I'm going to get more narrow.
Okay.
So last week I was at a conference called Identiverse, and I sat on a panel, it was a really interesting one because we had people from all sorts of disciplines there, and it was led by a woman who was involved in arbitration of international treaties. And her major point, which is one I've heard from scholars in this area before, like Elizabeth Ranieris, who, by the way, I recommend her book, Beyond Data. It makes this point that I'm about to make much better than I do. But it's about how our most fundamental rights that I called out the human rights treaties earlier, how we haven't really defined what they mean in a digital age, and how some of the laws that we take for granted on an international level should be applied in cyberspace. We need to do that work of defining it so that we can set a baseline of what rights we can all expect in digital spaces. Taking that to a more, starting to get a little bit more narrow to the United States in particular, we have a real patchwork of laws and regulations around privacy and security. The state that I live in is currently in the process. Our legislature is drafting our first comprehensive privacy legislation right now. And I know that it's really challenging because there are obviously voices on lots of different sides calling for different things. The word interoperability comes up a lot. Because platforms want to be interoperable, but they also want to be interoperable with countries like Europe. So I don't understand driving towards kind of a least common denominator approach in the United States, but I think it really hinders innovation having a real patchwork on things related to privacy, related to biometrics, related to security, related to AI, et cetera. I think that's why we need the broader conversation at the top. And then most specifically, I think things like privacy, I want to get really specific here. We've got some really exciting developments in digital identity taking place as we're looking to roll out verifiable credentials, standards for mobile driver's licenses, things like that. But at the moment in the US, at least, we don't have really strong standards for how browsers, wallets, verifiers are going to treat that data. And I think it's critical that we solve that problem.
Great points. Martha, what do you think?
Yeah, I was and I'm about to throw a wrench in all of this because, again, when you start talking about AI, right, and how data is going to be leveraged there and how to authenticate a user and it's stored somewhere in AI, from a regulation perspective, how are we thinking about that? Because then consent comes into play there, use of my data comes into place there. And so when you start talking about this is why I'm just a proponent of being at the table to talk about some of these issues so we can standardize it from a global perspective, because we're in a global economy from a, banking perspective, which was where I am. But I think that we are having the conversations, but we need to move a little faster because the technology is moving faster. And I think that we're going to be in a whirlwind of trouble if we don't come up with some standards. Especially on the US side, when you start talking about self-sovereign IDs, when you start talking about real IDs, how does that translate into a digital ID to the wallets, all of these things, and how am I governing the access of that information, the use of that information, the sharing of it, the consent of it, the distribution of it, the delegation of it from a caregiving perspective. There's so many things that we need to think about that it can be overwhelming, but it's the work of us, like at the table, having the conversations with not only the institutions, but with the regulators, with the feds, to say, here's how we can all think about it to where it serves the consumer, and then protects the consumer, but also is fair to the institutions and the organizations, because they're the ones that's going to have to comply with this and translate translate the old systems, right? Or transform the old systems into this new digital world that we're entering into. So.
Yes, I love that. We need everyone at the table really to design for that, right? And really well said, Martha. Elizabeth, I'd love to hear more about, I know you're around the world, right? And you've seen a lot globally in this space. What are you seeing in other countries that they're implementing for digital identity? And how do you think it will affect, tech and regulation and identity in the US?
There's so much to say here. So I'm going to do my best. So I do travel a lot. I just got back from ID for Africa, which is probably going to bias my response towards that part of the world. An amazing event. I strongly recommend going to it if you ever get the chance. So I would say you're seeing most countries around the world, or many countries that I interact with, treating identity systems as critical public infrastructure, designing strategic programs that are meant to work not just across government, but also across the economy. And you see them doing that in different ways, which does create interoperability challenges, which is solving that problem as part of the organization that I work with, City Hub. But you do see them treating it as critical strategic infrastructure. And that's why you see the term digital public infrastructure cropping up more and more. That's where countries are treating things like identity, like payment systems, et cetera, as public infrastructure that they're going to modularize and roll out strategically across government ecosystems. I think following that is really interesting and important. And then, like I said, you got them doing it in different ways. You have some that are looking to decentralize, like in the European Union, and then some that centralize, like in India. And then you have modular approaches like MOSIP, which is rolling out across large parts of Africa and Asia. But what you do see as all of this is going on is, like, how do you govern it? How do you keep all of this safe? And more organizations are coming together to set those types of standards that enable governments to take a strategic view of this infrastructure and safeguard it in terms of biometrics, DPI, et cetera. I think I'll stop there and see.
Okay. I mean, with that, I mean, which one do you think the U.S. is looking at? Europe or Africa or others, or trying to follow one of those systems?
I'm not going to, I don't want to speculate. I don't see the U.S. trying to emulate anyone. And the U.S. a few years ago did have a program there. If I'm assuming that folks like Jeremy, there are people out there in the world who would be giggling if I say the word NSTIC. It was our strategic identity, I can't remember, National Strategy for Secure Identities in Cyberspace, I think it was called. And they did a lot of work trying to create a strategy that does create identity as public infrastructure and a strategic program. And then there was some activity under the Biden administration, but we haven't seen to start a program that we then stick with and roll out. I'm not sure whether there's a strategic look at identity at the moment, let alone the regulation and policy side. But I wouldn't want to speculate. If anyone out there has insights.
Okay, well, we need to start the conversation somewhere. So that's awesome. Thanks for those insights. And yeah, so we went through, the landscape, what are fintechs, financial institutions, regulations, and now other countries, what they're doing. I'd love to turn the conversation now to really focus on the human element, which is so important here. And so, Amanda, what does inclusive identity look like in practice, especially for marginalized communities that may lack traditional documentation or digital footprints?
Yeah, no, this is the human side of the question, right, of digital identity, which to me is like the empathy side of banking, right? Inclusive and identity in practice is meeting people where they are. And that's really important, right? We need to make sure that we're building systems that caters to different scenarios and different audiences. And, what I'm thinking, what I've been looking at is that's been really interesting is, some banks and fintechs are piloting FedNow instant payment onboarding, which is a pretty interesting alternative way to verify someone's identification, leveraging different types of data sets like someone's credit files or, alternative data instead of leveraging government IDs. And, there are some really good examples of banks that are doing that. A good example of a bank is Nova Credit. Nova Credit is really fascinating to me because they're leveraging cross-border credit data as an alternative to help new immigrants verify their identity and build U.S. credit internally. So if you think about it, that's a unique, population that, especially within this environment, I don't want to get too political, but it's a unique way to let, certain populations into the ecosystem by leveraging alternative ways to review data. And, I think open banking and FedNow is going to definitely create, these continuous solutions for, this undeserved population. And so I also think that I look at some of the community fintechs, and I've had conversations with CDFIs, and CDFIs are community development financial institutions, and they're also leveraging mobile first verification tools. This is, I like this because it's tackling the gig economy, right? We have these gray workers, folks that are working and they want to be part of the ecosystem and they want to get, access to their payments and their paycheck faster. And some of these banks are looking at alternative ways to be able to move that money because we know it's very expensive when we think about the check cashing and all these alternative ways to obtain your paycheck. And with just some of these simple solutions, with us opening up a more, innovative digital economy, it's giving leverage to some of these folks that may not necessarily have your standard legacy documentation, which I know is controversial, but it is the right thing to do. Morally and ethically, it's the right thing to do. So that's my point of view.
Yeah, and a lot of the fintechs I've seen and that we work with really, do keep that end person in mind, which is so important. And great example about that organization, that bank, and organizations that are really thinking about this, and how are we building for the people. To that end, I'd love Martha to weigh in on, how do we design verification systems that are both secure and user-centric, particularly for populations with trust barriers to tech and to institutions?
And so the thing is, as we transition to this digital first, we still need to keep a multi-channel on-ramp, right? For the same reasons that Amanda just talked about. Like to be able to go into the bank and, talk to someone, maybe go to a branch kiosk, you still have multi-factor authentication to be able to authenticate me to say I am who I say who I am, but you let the customer choose, right? You give them some choices as we move from this real world verification, you're sitting in front of me, to this digital first authentication. That's going to be key. We also need to kind of explain, like, why are we asking for the data or the information that we're asking for? We can't just take it and just, not tell them why we need it. That's going to be key. I think education and empowerment is going to be key in that sense. And then I think these things kind of just puts the trust in the user's hands, and that builds trust. And so, and one of the things that we do, like with Prism, is because of the information we have, and from an open banking perspective, we could bring in all your accounts and all of the documents that you have. We put the consent in the account holder's hand, right, to choose who they want to give access to their vault and to their information. And so from a trust perspective, what better way to say, this is my data, because I say data rights are human rights. I own it. It's portable. I could take it wherever I want with me. But if you need access to it for whatever reason, to give me a loan, to get me to transact with me, to verify my identity, I can then invite you to my account. And so you see all of that. I don't need to send that to you, right? Because there's that trust barrier of like, who am I sending this information to? How long is it going to be stored there? Who else is going to have access to it? Who else is going to use it? And so if we design it in such a way to where we put the control in the consumer's hands to say, I'm going to give you access to what you need to, but not to the universe of information that you're asking me for, that you really don't need, that's going to build trust. And if we think about building these frameworks this way, I think it's going to be good for everyone. No matter if you're a digital native or if you're an older person trying to get access, everyone values their privacy and everyone wants to just say, you just need this one piece of information. Why are you asking me for 50 documents, right? And that's the key, I think, as we look at designing how to, one, design a framework or a system for accessing our systems, or for identifying who you are, but then also for servicing them.
Okay. Yes. Great. And to go from there, I'd love to move on to like what you think innovation and the road ahead is, and potential solutions, et cetera. Starting with Elizabeth, what innovations in digital identity are you most excited about, and how might they reshape verification at scale?
So, okay, I'm going to preface this by saying there's a quote that I love from Melvin Kranzberg. It's in the beginning of most of the papers I write, which is technology is neither good nor bad, but it's never neutral. So there are some super exciting innovations out there. I'm really excited about verifiable credentials. I'm excited about mobile driver's licenses, which, by the way, is kind of the US emergent strategy, which is to say we're kind of letting innovation, technological innovation lead at a state-by-state level. I'm really excited about what that can do. I'm very, very excited about ways that folks have developed and innovated to securely store and match biometric data. I think that secure biometrics is incredibly important for marginalized communities like refugees, and the way that that's being used at UNHCR, the way that it could be used for homeless populations or unhoused or housing unstable populations in the US. That's incredibly exciting. But whatever the technology is that we get super excited by, what's probably more exciting is the policy and the regulation and the really boring stuff that's going to keep us safe when we build it. So that's where I would like rather look to the future and get excited about how we build those institutions and the standards and everything that like ensures that once those technologies are built, they're built as safely as possible from the get-go, so that later on when someone else is in control of the technology, they're still actually safe.
Yeah, it's so important for the whole system to work, right?
Yeah.
That's the framework there.
Yeah.
And Amanda, would love to know, what your thoughts are on what role financial education and digital literacy play in ensuring people not only get verified, but understand what that verification grants them access to.
Yeah. No, I like what Martha said earlier, like her key word was trust, right? I know with all these efforts that we're putting together, what I appreciate about financial literacy and education is it enables that trust, right? We understand that verification, of course, is the first step, but education empowers that. So the more and more our users and consumers are educated on what are the options available to them, the better strategies that they can build in terms of verifying their data, right? We're already operating in an environment that has a multitude of items available to us, right? From mortgage loans to small business loans to just sending money to a friend, right? Having these different tools and access to being able to utilize these different tools require education to be able to know how to leverage them and how to use them. And so this is why I think it's really important. In our research, we've noticed that a lot of banks and credit unions are, embedding this know your access modules in terms of when you are getting verified or when you are tapping into the ecosystem, which I think is a really great process within the onboarding flows. Because if you are leveraging a tool like Prism, right, it's best to understand how to leverage that, how to use it. because time and speed is really important for individuals, and just being able to be educated on how to leverage some of these tools are very important. Our average consumers we're digitally savvy, but we just don't understand the options to us. And so that's why literacy and education is really important. It's almost, the heart of NAFLI. We are not only around the financial literacy talking about budgeting and credit management, but it's the inclusive side of technology where we need to understand what are some of our options so that we can essentially, our consumers can make better decisions that work for themselves. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think someone said this earlier, but really meeting people where they're at, right? So yes. Yeah, that's perfect. I have one more question that I'd love, all of your thoughts on. And please, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. We can see them come through. So hopefully we'll have time for a few of the audience questions as well. So big question, really. If you could redesign or really innovate on the verification process, what's one feature or principle you would build from day one? Who wants to jump into that?
That's a heavy one, Kristen. I'll jump in because this is just top of mind for me, and what we're doing with Prism is reciprocity as it relates to who gets to verify who, right? Because historically, we can trust the organizations that if this X bank is calling me, it's X bank calling me, right? And then I have to verify myself to them, and then they give us that information. But we're moving into a world, again, with AI, where we may not be able to trust that phone number hasn't been spoofed or that website hasn't been spoofed. And so how do we design systems that allow the consumer to verify that I am talking to the intended party that I should be talking to, right? And I know that we're making some strides in that, but I think we really need to focus on looking at a compliant framework across the board to be able to allow consumers to validate and verify the organization and the enterprises that they're working with as we continue to move faster in advancements with AI and other technologies that's out there. But that's really top of mind for me because, again, we're working with we call the senior population, the LMI population. They're not as savvy, and so they are the ones that are targeted from a fraud perspective the most. And so how do we help them verify who they're talking to? And that's key. So I would definitely look at how do we rebuild these enterprise level systems to build that verification piece so that it's reciprocal and it goes both ways.
Love that. That makes a lot of sense. Elizabeth, Amanda, what do you guys think?
It's so funny. Martha and Elizabeth, maybe you guys can build this, cross-platform interoperability. Like we are utilizing all these different platforms to bank, right? I think I said that earlier. Like we're using our payment apps, digital wallets. It would be amazing to have like a repeated verification loop where I have my phone and I can hop between different platforms. But that is a long list. But if I were to really speak to it, it's just making sure that there's always inclusive design in some of the verification products and tools that we're building, that we're still continuing to consider individuals that may not be not included in the process. And so that's really important. That is what we're striving for here at NAFLI. And so that I have my big technical wish list, but really the empathetic side of it is really just making sure that we continue to build products for all.
Awesome.
Amanda, hold that thought. We coming soon.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's the point. I mean, we're starting the conversation. We're bringing all the different industry experts in, but we don't know how do we build this, right? What do we do together to build this? So great ideas. Elizabeth, what do you think? What would you, if you could innovate on the process?
I mean, there are so many technologies that I could call out, and I think I did in my last answer. I'm super excited about the prospects for secure biometrics, but I'd rather follow Amanda's lead and probably go down the path of what use case would I innovate for. And I recently did talk somewhere else about the unhoused populations in the United States, and those who are in particular unhoused either because of or then later lost their foundational ID documents. So like missing birth certificates, missing social security cards, errors on those documents that make it hard to get verified. Those things are at the same time, and depending on what state you live in, they can be either incredibly hard to recover or they can be incredibly easy to go get someone else's, right? And I would like to solve that problem. I would like for everybody to be able to have irrefutable proof of who they are before the law, per Article 6 of the Human Rights Convention, and to have that be irrevocable by the government. I think that the systems we build need to solve those problems for those people in order to say we've really got inclusive identity right in this country around the world.
Nice. Yeah. So with that, I'd love to go to some audience questions. We have 5 more minutes. I know we're doing 45 minutes today, but I know we could probably talk about this for days, and we will, right? So this is just the beginning. Someone asked, what do you think various incentives can be used to help drive a more fair and equitable transition for the space, either by government or philanthropists or, I don't know, private? Any suggestions or ideas you're excited about in that space?
Incentives are always the thing to move the needle, right? So I do think that, for instance, if we took the model that was taken with the High Tech Act and that was a part of the ACA for health systems to convert their manual records to EMR records to where they incentivize clinicians in hospital systems to go digital. If we looked at that model and did something for banking, I think that it will accelerate us getting to digital systems that are for everyone faster, because again, whenever you're going to incentivize someone, people go faster. So I think that that's a model that we already have in place from a federal perspective that we can absolutely apply to this space.
When I look around the world, I'm seeing incentives being used in a lot of places, in particular where there are kind of international development donors in play. So when at ID for Africa, for example, you see a lot of the systems that are being developed are funded by the Gates Foundation or the United Nations Development Program or what have you. And where those programs are starting to embed safeguards requirements, like the UND, the safeguards program that I sit on now, where they say, as part of this funding to build your digital public infrastructure, you need to have these laws in place. You need to have privacy protections. You need to have this and that. Those safeguards really do work. Those incentives really do work. And so, yeah, I think they're a critical part of this at a global level. And in the U.S., I would like to see us have more incentives in play in the form of regulation.
Okay, let's go with one more audience question. Someone in the audience would love to hear if any of the speakers have thoughts on identity, privacy, payroll in the gig economy, especially in the experience economy. And specifically, they point to the new experience-related services launched by Airbnb. Anyone have thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I don't have. Go ahead, Amanda, since you are in the gig economy and you talk about that a lot.
Yeah, no, apologies. I think it's a great question. And I think, this is why I think looking into what the banks are doing with FedNow and open banking and alternative data leverage is, an opportunity for them to leverage your payroll data. But there is, I think, as Martha and Elizabeth mentioned, there's consent aspects of this that I think we have not yet tackled yet, right? There's a compliant and regulatory aspects of this that I think is still being worked through. But I think that we are progressing with that, with all the opportunities that we're having with open banking. I think AI is also changing, how we're leveraging data. And I think organizations are a little worried about what is the right way to go about it. But I think it's a great question. And I might start asking because we get a chance to talk to policymakers and things like that. And so it is a good question to ask. And I'll, definitely look into this. I think it's a good point to make.
All right. With that, I think we have to wrap it up, unfortunately. This has been such a great time. I've learned so much from you all. So really appreciate Amanda, Elizabeth, and Martha, you being here, you sharing your expertise and your thoughts with us. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. And so thank you for all joining from CAFE, from Center for Accelerating Financial Equity, and also from the National Alliance for Financial Literacy and Inclusion, NAFLI. Please follow us, please join, follow our organizations, join in. We're both building very inclusive communities with financial institutions, fintechs, regulators, different industry experts, investors, kind of everyone to work together. As we talked about earlier, how do we all come together really to build the future of digital identity systems that really work for our financial system, but really also for people, right? Which is super important. Anyone have any last words?
If anyone out there wants to get involved in standards development, hit me up.
Yeah. And thank you guys for joining us. This was amazing. Kristen, thank you so much for doing this with us. And Martha and Elizabeth, your expertise is amazing. I think this is a very important topic, and it's just being able to educate all consumers to understand what's out there and what's available to them.
Yeah, and I'd say this is an opportunity for us to get it right as we move to the digital first world. So we all need to be talking to one another and having more conversations like this. And so thank you for having us. This was awesome.